I did a live 90-minute, 2-hour program. What I didn't know was it was all a setup so the players could come and invade. So if we just play it. When the broadcast ended, the chief executive, Peter Kenyon, said, "Thank you very much," stood up and left.
I think they only mess you about if they like you.
There should have been a replay.
Of course,
and football's let itself down in this country. Hi, gang. On the Joy of Football podcast this week, Martin and I kick off with Martin's letter from the Gantry on the FA Cup.
Then we need to talk about these managerial changes.
3 of the best, young player, old player, from James McAtee to Daniel Munoz.
And they used to be giants, Coventry City.
A special for Liverpool people. Comparisons, forwards, centre forwards. Who was the best?
And like every football occasion these days, we have a good lump of our stoppage time.
When I get battered.
He's right.
The Joy of Football podcast. With me, Neil Barnett.
And with me, Martin Tyler.
Looks rush shot in! Rooney! Aguero!
The Joy of Football. Hello, the Joy of Football podcast with Martin Tyler, the greatest commentator in the world, and me, Neil Barnett. And today I'm working off a laptop, not notes, because I have no Wi-Fi, because EE have failed to fix my Wi-Fi after about 2 weeks of not having it. So we won't be coming to you for sponsorship just yet, EE.
That's one of the worst. That's a new section that we're having in our podcast to rival 3 of the best. There are problems, but Neil still welcomes us into his home, and we're in the kitchen having had a brief sortie into my kitchen, which you were very badly missed. So,
thank you. Yes, rather nasty facial infection. Let's go.
I thought it was because Chelsea lost to Ipswich.
Yeah. Well, we're going to start today with Letter from the Gantry by Martin Tyler. Why? Well, it's FA Cup third round week. We've just had it, and we love it.
Letter from the Gantry.
Cheers, Neil. Yeah, I hope it sets the tone for the rest of the podcast. The joy of football as a commentator and as a fan is that no 2 games are ever quite the same, but there are often similarities, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, above the age of 30 say, who found themselves comparing Arsenal's third-round FA Cup tie against Manchester United to that epic semi-final replay between the clubs in 1999. The games share an element of history. The first was the last ever semi-final replay, and the recent clash has taken place in the first year. Replays have been abolished throughout the entire competition proper, therefore impacting the third round. On both occasions, United had a player sent off. Roy Keane back then, Diogo Dalot this time. Arsenal wasted a penalty each time. For Dennis Bergkamp, now read Martin Odegaard. Altay Bayindir replicated the famous Peter Schmeichel spot kick save. 2 Manchester United triumphs when they really overcame the odds. United got through to this season's fourth round via a penalty shootout with "this has got to be decided on the day" mandate from the Football Association. In 1999, the decisive moment came courtesy of one of the competition's most unforgettable goals, a venomous shot in extra time at the end of a weaving run from the then 25-year-old Ryan Giggs. Just over 25 years on from that, I was commentating on Ryan's FA Cup involvement in this season's third round. It was a far cry from those wild celebrations at Villa Park towards the end of the last century. As director of football, he was alongside manager Carl Robinson in the Salford City dugout at the Etihad Stadium. Salford, as you all know, were thumped 8-0, but they'd never been this far before in the competition, and that achievement should not be forgotten because of the margin of defeat. It's around a decade since the club was taken over by the group known as United's Class of '92, And facing Manchester City in a competitive match for the very first time was another step towards the ambitions of the League Two club from just across town. Salford, as a place incidentally, has been a city for almost 100 years. That surprised me. When the Nevilles, Nicky Butt, Paul Scholes, David Beckham and Ryan took control, they changed the club's shirts to a very Manchester United red. During the commentary, I wondered whether that look, together with the very strong ownership connections with Old Trafford, was a big reason why Manchester City did not let up. Co-commentator Stuart Robson, though, was a voice of reason in my ear, pointing out that several City youngsters were wanting to make the very most of minutes in the first team, and that was borne out by a hat-trick from James McAtee and goals from 19-year-old Nico O'Reilly, and on his debut after a summer switch from West Ham from Divin Mubama. Jack Grealish was also determined to play himself back into form, and he had a fine game. And Jeremy Doku set the tone right from the off, finishing with 2 goals and 2 assists. Most Premier League teams rang the changes, unless it was an all-top division clash. Usually it's around the midweek fixtures before the big FA Cup weekend, which makes selection difficult for the top-flight managers. This year, it's a full set of midweek games, hard on the heels of the third round. The rotations did little harm. 17 of the 20 Premier League sides are safely through. The only exits, Arsenal, of course, to Manchester United, and West Ham at Aston Villa. Plus the one real shock. Brentford, so brilliant usually at home, knocked out by the club that's bottom of the Championship, Plymouth Argyle, whose reward is a money-spinning tie at home to Liverpool. Thomas Frank, the Brentford manager, only started 4 of the 11, which began the 5-0 win at Southampton a week earlier. I don't like to finish with a gripe because, despite my age, I work in today's world and I recognise current problems in the football industry. But spare a thought for Tamworth. 0-0 after 90 minutes at home to Tottenham. In any previous season, that would have earned the bounty and the blessing of a replay in North London. Tamworth, a rare part-time club in the full-time standards of the National League. They did the pyramid proud, and after their excellent 90 minutes, deserved the replay reward which the regulations have taken from them. And in doing so, part of the charm of the FA Cup has gone as well.
Here. I had to look up where Tamworth was. I didn't know where it was in England.
I have done a game there, actually. They played Norwich City, I think, at the time when Dion Dublin had gone back to Norwich right at the end of his career. I remember seeing him there. I think he was a player rather than a broadcaster, which I could see him as
Didn't
now.
he play centre half?
He might have. I don't know whether he played in the game or whether he was on the bench. But the ground has been upgraded, and of course they had a 3G artificial pitch, which does help the team that plays on all the time. Even when you're Tottenham Hotspur, you might train occasionally when the weather's bad on an artificial pitch, but you're a grass football team like all the top.
There should have been a replay.
Of course,
and football's let itself down in this country.
And the long throw. Speaking up for the non-league teams, there's nothing wrong with a long throw. And of course, Brentford, who obviously didn't use it to very good effect against Plymouth, they do that, and it is a sort of bit of a throwback. It's a bit snobby if you people who don't have a long thrower in the team go, that's a bit. I don't like that. They certainly don't like defending it.
I was at Chelsea Morecambe, and there was a penalty in our game, and it was on the far side of the penalty area after a corner hadn't been cleared, and I didn't actually see the handball that took place, and I don't think the referee saw it either. And of course, there was no VAR, and the linesman gave the penalty. And when I saw it back on the internet, not here because I haven't got any internet here, but at the local patisserie, it was clear. It was clear, but it was the linesman who gave it. No problem. No VAR. No problem.
What did you think generally, though? My one observation. I commentated the Manchester City game, and I watched a lot of the other games that were live on TV. I don't think the brawl, the unsavoury episode following the award of the Arsenal penalty would have happened if VAR had been there, because Harry Maguire, who was the player who was culpable, said the referee, would have had at least the video check to see whether it was a penalty or not, and therefore tempers wouldn't have been lost. So maybe in the spirit of 1+ for VAR, in the spirit of behaviour, it was missed, you know?
Yeah, no, I'm not against VAR. I'm just against the people running it. And as I've always said, But on my occasion, the people running the game got it right, and I hadn't seen it. And maybe on the Arsenal Manchester United one, it was down to the goalkeeper getting it right.
But what I would say is that I think it's wrong that it comes in at the 5th round, because that again is just sort of changing. We've now abolished replays all the way through it, abolished VAR all the way through it. And let's be a competition that stands alone, as the Championship, the football EFL does, everybody but the Premier League in English football. So I don't see why you bring it in. Are you afraid now maybe we'd have a brawl at Wembley in the final, which has very rarely happened actually going down the years. But maybe again, the fact that players are used to having a second look at it and being reprieved and finding it an injustice actually being sorted out properly. I don't know, but I must say I watched the Arsenal game thinking, VR, look at that, and of course sort of having to get it back into my psyche that it wasn't there. I'd be very interested to know if anybody has any opinions on that. We'd like to hear it really, whether the teams that are used to having VAR and maybe a decision went against them, whether they really missed it much more than they ever thought they would.
And well, the other thing that happened in my game was Jadon Sancho was dribbling into the Morecambe penalty area. João Felix made a run to support him, got grabbed by the arm and pulled down, went down over theatrically, and the referee said no. And I was, penalty, and it wasn't given. And I went and looked at that on in my patisserie. Yeah. And referee got it right in as much as I think the guy let go as he ran into the penalty area. So it was a foul and the referee got that wrong, but it wasn't a penalty. And had VAR looked at it, VAR wouldn't have had anything to do with it, because if he didn't pass into the penalty area, then it's not a VAR decision to make. So in my game, VAR wasn't missed. Yeah. Right. We're going to move on from this to the other major talking point of the last week or so. We need to talk about, and we talked about the lack of English managers. We responded to Carlton Cole on the podcast talking about the lack of English managers. We had last week Troy Deeney on the podcast saying English managers are lazy. And in the last week, we've said goodbye to Sean Dyche. We've, of course, recently said goodbye to Gary O'Neill and somebody else. Have we said goodbye to another English manager?
Russell Martin, you're thinking.
Russell Martin,
who's born in England,
Scottish.
Yeah.
But talking of Scotsman, we've gained David Moyes.
Regained.
And we've regained Graham Potter, who I desperately wanted to call Harry Potter at that moment. It's grim for English managers.
Well, it's a global game with clubs owned by non-British people mostly. So they will have their feelings about the global nature of the marketplace in which they can choose managers from. And I think it's just a consequence of that. I think Troy, what I wish I'd said to Troy was, hang on, the players are the ones that go in 10 till 12 and then go off for the rest of the day and do whatever else they have. But yeah, it was an interesting observation that managers don't put as much time. My experience actually is most of them do put plenty of time into it. Yeah, but maybe didn't right at the start of Troy's career. I don't know. That's for him to say.
Well, he was right about the fact that English managers, unlike in the rest of Europe, used to give players Sunday off and Wednesday off, and that was traditional. And when the overseas managers started coming over, all that went out the window. But of course, now there's so many more midweek games now.
Yes, it's really difficult. But I do think the simple answer to Carlton's suggestion about it being an anti-English thing is not because people are anti the style of English management. It's just that they've got so many more to choose from. And the same has applied, and we've got used to it now from, what were the 12 non-British players in the first round of Premier League games back in 1992. And now you're lucky if you get to, in a section of games, if you get 12 English players. Or it's changed enormously. And I think the benefits outweigh the problems. Also, I think the other thing where the coaches suffer is the nationality of the manager dictates usually the nationalities of his backup team, his assistants, and even his medical team, and all the extra bodies that now the Premier League can employ to look after a large group of players and to give them more hands-on, more one-to-one attention than they've ever had in the past, where there was I go back to my days when I was travelling on the bus to Wembley with teams like Southampton, where there was probably 13 players, a physio, an assistant manager, maybe one other admin person, the club secretary, and a couple of directors.
Kitman.
Yeah, the kitmen. Yeah,
Oh no, they'd probably already be there.
Yeah, they would. They would be.
I mean, we've got to the situation now where Bristol Rovers have hired a manager called Inigo Calderon, who's got virtually no managerial experience whatsoever, but they go for a non-English no experience rather than English no experience. I can understand that in a way. I mean, when you've got your major English managers launching the ball in a 1980s way. Sorry, Sean, but still,
I don't think you say Newcastle United do that.
No. But
but those are stereotypes that we should be better than churning out, because the reality is that there are a lot of good people in this country and a lot of good people from other marketplaces who want to come and work in this country. Actually the delight we should take from all this is that people want to come here. And of course we have coaches going off around the world, and the FA have been very good in finding work for a lot of coaches who can't get jobs in this country. But the attraction of our football comes with some difficulties, and the difficulties are that the local heroes, both on the field and in the dugout and at the training ground, are much harder to find.
We talked last week about Michael Carrick at Middlesbrough. Could he be the one to change the mould? I mean, in many ways, Graham Potter has changed the mould in his coaching style.
Why didn't West Ham go to Michael Carrick? He's an ex-West Ham player to start with. I mean, I didn't see his name mentioned at all. And before that, they went for Amorim, didn't they? And famously got it wrong, or the deal wasn't doable. And they replaced a British manager with a Spaniard who'd not done particularly well at Wolves, but had a bit of a CV before that. I don't know. I mean, today's story is that the director of football at West Ham might be under threat, Tim Steidten. That's sort of coming out that he's now been involved in, and he was seen with Graham Potter before the news came out. We were sitting here last week saying, "Oh well, we don't know for sure." Yeah. But all the smart intel was that Graham would get the job, which he has done. So there are, I don't know. That's a non-English director of football, a club actually owned by an Englishman, David Sullivan. So I think every situation has its specifics, and for us to try and just generalise it, that's as far as I go to say it is a global game, and therefore the owners have every right to use the globe to find who they think is the right man for the job.
But as I said last week, we're looking at the Championship and we're seeing the same people, Chris Wilder, Scott Parker, leading the way for the English there. That there's no new faces on the block.
I'm sure there is, but I can't think of them at the moment. But the opportunity, I know at Woking we've just appointed Neil Ardley, who was a Premier League player with the old Wimbledon and has had jobs before, and is doing very well actually from a difficult position. And is he operating at National League level because he wants to be higher, but this is the job that's available for him? Maybe that's the case, but he's still pretty young and he's still very bright and he's got a lot of experience. And much to my disappointment, we don't whack it. Because I've grown up on the philosophy of playing their half of the pitch, get the ball forward quickly, as all centre forwards would want. But so listen, it's more complicated. But I just think the other factor we haven't talked about is it's how you present yourself at the interview as well. That has become a real political manoeuvre now. So if you're articulate and you have a good presentation pack with laptops like yours and on-screen presentations and bullet heads and bullet points rather, and I do think that gets people jobs as well. And of course, it is part of how you go about getting a job. But I'm not sure if that's a national thing in all industries. Maybe it is now. Maybe football's just waking up to that. I don't know. But not everybody is gifted. As Bob Paisley would never have got a job under these, and he's one of the most successful English managers ever. He would never have got a job by putting a presentation together, even with what was available in those days.
Let me just ask you this. Coaching now is so specific. Each coach has a philosophy, and you have to play their way. And young players coming into their squads have to learn the way. And it's all about not learning the basics of football, it's learning the basics of the coach's philosophy. And I think more and more when people are transferred to another club, they're finding it hard to adapt because they have to adapt from the old philosophy to a completely new philosophy. And one of the things that these coaches do now is stamp their philosophy on a club. And unless you're Pep, I'm not sure that's such a great idea. And one of the things that Arne Slot seems to have done is come in and adapt to the players that he's inherited, rather than said, this is my way of playing. Yeah, he's tweaked it from Jurgen Klopp, but it's been a respectful takeover of the players that he's inherited. And elsewhere, I just see, this is my philosophy. And I see players leaving clubs and not being able to deal with the next philosophy.
I'll throw something else into that, Neil. I think you've got a point. And the thing that the philosophy can only be implemented by a transfer window. So now, when we can only sign players in two very relatively short periods of the year, the calendar year, he needs 2 or 3 transfer windows. That's I keep hearing that. Well, he doesn't. He doesn't need that.
He needs to change his philosophy.
He basically needs to make the best use of the players that he's got, and then work from a position of better strength towards getting his philosophy right.
Do you think that the reason Everton changed so early in the transfer window from Sean Dyche to David Moyes, who's, let's face it, their football philosophies are not a long way apart, was simply in order that if they were going to sign players, they wanted the new manager to do it rather than the quite possibly in the near future departing one. Therefore, they got him to depart there and there.
It looks a bit like that because it was so close to...
I mean, why else would you change from Sean Dyche to David Moyes?
I don't know. There was a suggestion that Sean might have said, I can't do any more with this group in the context of I need more players.
Yeah.
And
he does, because they haven't had a goal scorer for
that was taken
modern history.
Maybe that was taken by the board as an admission of running out of energy for the job. I'm sure that wasn't the case. I see a fair bit of Sean, and he never runs out of energy, and his standards are still as high, and he still makes he makes the best of what he's got, which is what we're getting back to. Yeah. But Woking signed a player, and they have a director of football now, and I read he will fit into our philosophy. Well, hang on a minute. We're 17th in the National League. The philosophy ain't going to get us out. A lot of hard work and buying better players. That nothing to do with the philosophy. Get better players. I've been 20 years ago. The better the team we had, the more success we had. It's as simple as that. Yeah. The better, the coach can only do so much. It's how good are your players and how well can you get the best out of those players. That's nothing to do with philosophy. That's an attitude of management skills.
Just a couple of things on that. Time. I knew Neil Ardley when I was doing Wimbledon Club Call, and he was in the Wimbledon youth team. I can remember him at 16 coming through. Yeah. The other thing is, just to round all this up with the way that things are developing. FA Cup. Why don't we go back to having fewer than 5 substitutes? Why don't we go back to having 3 substitutes? Why don't we even go back to having 1 substitute? Why does it all have to be this philosophy of the coach, the coach, the coach? Why can't it be player versus player? If the FA Cup wants to be really clever, let's go back. To begin with, I'll accept 5 on the bench, and you can only use 3. Well, that'll be another thing. But it's the game's too bloated, and we have too many players at too few clubs, and we need to spread them out a bit more. And
well, on that, it's not a coach's thing; it's a medical thing. That's the excuse for having so many substitutes. From the coach's point of view, it's a bonus because you can
it's power. It's power.
No, you can keep players happy.
It's a coach's game.
Today, we're speaking before a Chelsea game, and Maresca's press conference. He's been addressed about he's had the easiest job of all the top coaches to keep people happy because he's had a weak European competition to go into, and he can play pretty much anybody in there, and they're going to win, and they have done, and they've done the club proud. The second team basically is what you call the football combination team.
It is.
Really.
Yeah.
But now there's no Chelsea European games for a couple of months. So how's he going to keep them happy? And one of the ways he keeps them happy is by playing them in the FA Cup probably, and maybe playing them in a midweek league game.
Well, I think
which he did.
Ipswich put the death to that.
Yeah,
he won't play him at Brighton in the FA Cup. Right, let's move on before I get depressed. But only 3 substitutes maximum in the FA Cup.
Yeah, I think that's a very sensible idea.
It gives it a different setting to the other competitions. It gives it a different philosophy. Right.
But are fans happy now to see their star names play for an hour? Because that's what's happening, particularly for the strikers. So when there were no subs, you saw your idol unless you got injured for the whole game. With 1 sub, you got every chance of that happening. Even with 3 subs, one of which was a goalkeeper originally when they brought it in, who probably was never going to get on. So you got better value for your price in terms of the top players. Yeah, there's some very good players coming on as the replacements. But if you've got, like Son, for example, with Spurs, what are they going to do? Is he going to play a half now? He's hardly playing. He's not even starting all the games. Those fans who come to Tottenham, and they're getting a lot of money out of the involvement with the Korean Republic, they're not going to be too happy if he's taken off. And he's certainly not happy because he wants to play every minute. So there are subtleties about this. But I think less subs would give the starters a proper chance to express themselves.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, and everybody else, 3 of the best.
And he makes them pay.
3 of the best. He's made them pay. And that completes a wonderful hat-trick.
Young player, old player. Right, this week, who are you going for? Young player.
Well, I had a whole lot in front of me commentating on Manchester City's game against Salford City, including a goalkeeper who, unfortunately for him, will, I hope, recover very quickly of letting in 8. Matty Young, who's on loan from Sunderland and kept 6 consecutive clean sheets in League Two before this chastening experience. But the Manchester City youngsters took full advantage. Nico O'Reilly, who played as a sort of left back, really, which we didn't think he was capable of doing, played really well. And Jeremy Doku's only 22, so he would count as a young player. And Mubama made this move on a compensation clause as a Youth Cup winner at West Ham to Manchester City, so went under the radar a bit. He was very much on the radar and played up front, and probably got more balls into feet than Erling Haaland might have got in that game, because he's that kind of player. But I'm going for James McAtee because he got the hat-trick. And he's been around a while at Manchester City. He's been out on loan. He was at Sheffield United in their relegation season last season and played a lot of Premier League football. He's still got a squad number in the 80s, which suggests he's not making the kind of progress that sometimes we judge players by. But Phil Foden's still 47, so maybe it doesn't happen at City. But he scored
47 squad number, not 47 years old.
47 squad number, yeah. And James McAtee is not 80 years old. That's the subject we don't talk about here. James McAtee, his brother's playing for Bolton. He's a football family. They've got family connections with the famous Ball family.
Really?
I think great uncle or great nephew of Alan, the World Cup winner. So there's football in the blood. But the goals, the goals were very briefly. Look, go and find them. They're out there, of course. The first one, when he came across at the near post, Doku whipped it across low, and he got in front of the defender and guided it into the other corner. It was delightful, really, absolutely beautiful goal. Then he intercepted a Phil Foden shot, which wasn't hit very well, and turned it into a pass and gave Phil an assist, and then tucked that one away from close range and from almost the same spot. He came in on a cross. I think it might have been Jack Grealish played it across, and he slid in like a proper striker. And he's not a striker, although Pep did say in his pre-match press conference about who was going to play up front if Erling didn't play, which he didn't, that I've got others who can play up there. Foden, which we know is what you call the false nine, is an expression I don't like, but and McAtee as well. So he got a striker's goal for the hat-trick, and everyone was thrilled for him, absolutely thrilled, because he's put in his time. It probably going to have to earn a career elsewhere, but if he's got a chance of making it at Manchester City, that game, admittedly against lower division opposition, but he really made the most of it. So with plenty of competition about over the FA Cup weekend, he's my young player.
Yeah, and he played a lot in pre-season in the States when Manchester City were out there, obviously after the Euros and a couple of
he played in the Community Shield when he came back. Yeah.
So he's made a bit of he's begun to make a statement this season.
Yeah.
My young player is a Chelsea player, Josh Acheampong, who made his full league debut at Crystal Palace and played very well next to Levi Colwill, ahead of Tosin Adebayo, and ahead of Axel Disasi. Yeah. And the reason he was chosen ahead of them is probably because he's better. And he's come through.
But there's a story about today that Chalobah's going to be called back.
Well, yeah, that's been going for a while. But I said it was an absolutely ridiculous decision to get rid of him. But I want to use Josh as an example. He came through the ranks playing centre back, and then when he sort of got near the first team, he was suddenly a right back, and he came into the first team for his first few appearances as a right back and did well. But suddenly here, he's been launched back to centre-back when he's hardly played it. I want to go back to the beginning of the century when Claudio Ranieri was in charge. And he used to drive me up the wall, Claudio Ranieri, by playing experienced players out of position. I remember a game at Middlesbrough where at half-time he moved Marcel Desailly, one of the world's greatest centre-backs, to left-back. But what I learnt from knowing him was that he did this because he didn't believe, like most coaches, that when you bring youngsters in, you play them in a position different from where they're experts at. He believed that you played them in their best position. So the reason he moved Desailly to left back was so that a 19-year-old John Terry could play centre back. And he did this with everyone. And he was of the belief that you don't muck about and play a centre forward on the wing or a midfielder, wide midfield. You play them in their best positions. And he convinced me that he was the one who knew what he was doing, Ranieri. And I'm delighted that this non-right back who can get by at right back, Josh Acheampong, has been suddenly, due to injuries and due to maybe the failure of people to take their chance when they've been given it in the squad, to play him in his best position at centre-back. That is what should always happen. I've learnt that. That is, don't play people on the wing who are bulky strikers. Play them at centre forward if they're a centre forward, or don't play them. You're not clever by putting people out of position. You're stupid, and it happens too much. And well done to Enzo Maresca on this occasion. Josh Acheampong, centre back. Old player.
Yes, I'm going for a slightly left field, but I think he's earned whatever this accolade is. Hansi Flick, who is now the head coach stroke manager of Barcelona. German, of course, was the assistant coach when Germany won to Jogi Löw, when Germany won the World Cup in 2014. Then later on had a go at being the number one. Didn't quite work out the same way for him in charge of Germany. And had a previous Champions League winner, I think, to his name. With
He
Bayern-
won the
Bayern-
treble. He
Bayern
won the
Munich.
treble
Yeah,
in
yeah.
2020
Yes.
because I've forgotten who he took over from, but it might have been the youngster. No, Tuchel took over from him, but he took over when they were
You're thinking
struggling.
of Nagelsmann, but
And he
wasn't.
won the
He
treble.
came afterwards. I
Yeah,
think,
he won the treble.
But anyway, so Barcelona aren't doing particularly well, and certainly by their standards, of their aspirations, their expectations. And they've been playing this Spanish Super Cup, which pitted them in the final against Real Madrid, who are doing pretty well, although Atletico Madrid are doing a bit better in La Liga. And Real Madrid, massive, good run into this tournament. Barcelona less so. And it was an extraordinary game in which Kylian Mbappe scored the sort of goal that everybody expects him to score every week, really, to give Real the lead. But Barcelona's response was amazing. And so they built such a cushion that when their goalkeeper was sent off early in the second half, they still managed to win the game 5-2.
The goalkeeper being...
I was going to give you a dramatic pause for that, who came out of retirement, Wojciech Szczesny, well known in the Premier League, of course, and in Serie A. So yeah, he came out of retirement. He was a free agent. I think there was some time when he was only allowed to play at a certain point, and with Barcelona, if you're not registered, it's all sorts of complications. But anyway, he played. He got himself sent off. They had a sub-goalkeeper on the bench, but obviously played the rest of the game with 10 men, which was most of the second half.
And that was all because the Barcelona goalkeeper, Ter Stegen, who was the obvious successor to Neuer in the German national team. Poor bloke, he got a year's injury immediately after Neuer announced his international retirement.
Yeah, but Neuer was out for a while before then, wasn't he? Anyway, it was a tale of a goalkeeper, especially as one that we sort of have knowledge of here. But it was the general level of performance. I mean, that must have been such a shock to Real Madrid. And I imagine Carlo's eyebrow was going higher and higher as the goals went in, and they were further and further behind. But anyway, a special mention. We don't always go outside our comfort zone of British football, but that really caught my eye.
My old player, I want to come back to the theme that we've been running a little bit about philosophy of football. My old player is Paul Gascoigne. How would he have fitted into any coach's philosophy? What can you do with a guy like Paul Gascoigne? Well, you can say, he doesn't fit into my philosophy, so I'm not going to choose him. Or you can say, well, actually, he's the best player in the country, which he was at the end of the 1980s, beginning of the 1990s. Therefore, I've got to fit my philosophy around him.
But how many team around him, which is what the people who got the best out of Paul did. I think if there was somebody like that, the game is such a team game now, and of course your best player might only play for 65 minutes, so you can't necessarily play him for 90 minutes every week like Gazza would want to, and the circumstances with fewer substitutes in those days and less concern about the physical and indeed the mental difficulties of playing top level football every 3 days. He just ploughed on. Players always wanted to play. Now they've been advised not to go beyond a certain point medically. There are all sorts of checks, and they can predict injuries. So if somebody says you're going to have a calf strain if you play today, then you don't play, however much you want to play. One or two would probably rubbish that, but they're an increasing minority who would say, I don't care. I feel fit to play. If you want to pick me, I'm going to go and play. It was a wonderful experience watching Paul Gascoigne grow from a lippy young man in the tunnel at St James's Park, where he used to always talk to all the broadcasters and play practical jokes, and was just somebody you, once you'd met, you remember for the rest of your life. And I'm still remembering him with great affection, and I wish him well. And it's nice of you to bring him up in the podcast.
Yeah, my favourite Paul Gascoigne moment when he was playing for Tottenham. And he was doing the warm-up before a game at Stamford Bridge. And, of course, Tottenham was getting booed horrendously. he was pinging a ball from one touchline to the other with somebody on the other side. And every time he pinged it, he was booed by the stand behind him, by the Chelsea supporters. And he trapped this ball that was pinged across to him, and he just stepped aside and did a Rabona, one leg behind the other, and he pinged this ball 70 yards across the pitch, and it landed absolutely at the feet of the bloke he was passing with, and the whole stand just stood up and applauded, and he just turned round and gave a wry little smile and carried on with his warm-up. It was utter genius. It was just utter genius. In fact, it was the best moment of the game. I don't remember the game, but I just remember the pre-match.
I was lucky enough to be there commentating on the goal in Euro 96 against Scotland. I'm not sure that I had the vocabulary to do that justice, but another one that I do remember was he scored in a North London derby with his stocking foot because his boot had come off. I'm sure that's on YouTube to have a look at. That was I can't, in all the years I broadcast, I can't remember anybody else doing that in my line of vision anyway. I guess I did it.
Brilliant. Okay, we come on to player. By the way, if you're enjoying this podcast, make sure you subscribe or like it or do whatever you need to do in order to give us the oomph and to give me an oomph because I've got no Wi-Fi. Player this week. Who's your player?
Oh, you'll be pleased with this one.
I will.
The last Premier League game I commentated on was Nottingham Forest winning 3-0 at Wolves, and Callum Hudson-Odoi was absolutely outstanding. And he had an assist and also played the pass for James Ward-Prowse to have an assist on the third goal, and that also meant he went the distance, which he hasn't always been doing, largely because of these extra substitutes. You can take your wingers off if you need to maybe batten down the hatches a bit. But I wouldn't say I knew Callum very well, but his brother Bradley, who's I think he's business manager now, played for Alan Dowson and myself at Hampton and Richmond, and was a very good player, a winger, not quite perhaps as intricate as Callum can be, but certainly with an eye for goal as well. And so when Bradley was playing for us, the final whistle would go, and he'd go, "I'm just going to pop over and see my brother before he goes." And so we sort of saw Callum on a more regular basis, perhaps than other people in non-league football would have done. And Bradley got a couple of goals. I think it was against Truro in a playoff game for Hampton. And Callum was watching, and we were celebrating, got through to the next round of the playoffs. And so I went over to Callum and said, "See, you're not the only one." He was already in Chelsea's first team then. I said, "I'm not sure. It's a bit of a toss-up between you and Brad." And so I was really pleased. He's had a very mixed time since he left Chelsea. He obviously played for England a long time ago. Thomas Tuchel was at the game.
I think he'll be in the first England squad.
Yeah, well, it'll be one of those comebacks. There are stats of the length of time between a cap and another cap, which I think I seem to remember Frank Lampard Senior maybe was in that category of two caps like a long apart. I may have got that wrong, but it will be quite a while since Callum I think he got 3 caps.
Yeah, he did.
So
I'd just like to say
he's in the right team, right manager, and he looks like he's a maturer player.
Yeah. I'd like to say 2 things about Callum. He came through at youth level playing all on the left wing. Then he got in the first team, right wing back. He once got played for a period of 6 games on the left wing, and he played his best football. But on the 6th game, he didn't have a good game. Youth product dropped. It wouldn't have happened to someone who'd been signed. Chelsea now have Pedro Neto, Noni Madueke, Jadon Sancho, who he and Callum are best mates, and
Mudryk.
Mikhailo Mudryk, who of course isn't available at the moment, and
the combined cost of those.
Sancho
has a bit.
All I would say is, I think Hudson-Odoi is having a better season than any of them. That's and you you stick by your youth products. If you have to go through the lows to get to the highs, and in the end, you finish up swapping for other youth products. Manchester City's Jadon Sancho, and you spend money. And where do you finish up? I know Chelsea didn't sign Sancho from City, and we'll get him.
He was
from
a
20.
Chelsea fan, wasn't he? He's a London
Yeah,
boy.
that's what he says.
South
yeah.
London boy, yeah.
And so I love him. I think he's a good player. I think he's better than Neto. But Callum Hudson-Odoi, these big clubs are not doing well enough by these players. They're not caring for them through the troughs and believing they can reach the heights. And it's,
well, you've also got the financial issues now.
Yeah.
And we've had a lot of conversations about Conor Gallagher, who's doing pretty well for himself.
Well, I'll bring up
Chelsea are doing pretty well without him. So
I'll bring up another
happen.
one, Ola Reina at Nottingham Forest. He's been linked with Manchester City and who is a bit of a mini Kyle Walker in a way. I mean, he plays in the same way. And I'm going to bring up a right back for my player this week, not Ola Aina, as he's now called.
Aina, yeah. That's his dad, I think, told him that he was mispronouncing his name. But sometimes people let them, they just let it go.
Well, I did ask him when he was 16.
Yes, but I've had it with Brozier.
Yeah, I know.
He's changed his name under peer group pressure.
But the two best right backs I've seen this season are Ola for Nottingham Forest and Daniel Munoz for a bottom half of the table team, Crystal Palace, and he's my player this week, Munoz. He came in, didn't he? I think, was it last January?
It was last January, and it was at the time Roy Hodgson left the club. So I don't think it was anything to do with Oliver Glasner, who he was there. But I think Dougie Friedman, who, when we talk about directors of football and their shortcomings, he never gets mentioned because he's very good at what he does and cultivated by other clubs. I think the famous case where Manchester United quite recently pursued him before they made the current changes. So he got him in. At the same time, they got Adam Wharton in from Blackburn, and they were both outstanding. They finished the season last season fantastically well.
And Munoz has carried on.
Yeah.
And against Chelsea at Crystal Palace on the first Saturday of this year, he tore Cucurella apart, playing wingback, obviously, and Palace had this this idea that they kept hitting long diagonals out to Munoz, and he was unstoppable. But he does his defensive work as well, and he's about 26, 27. I think the big clubs will be looking at him very, very quickly, and Palace will need to work hard to keep hold of him because he has been a success straight from the off, and he's got better.
And the players love him. They absolutely fitted in so well. Colombian, and he's in their national setup, of course. But he's very low profile compared to some of the South Americans that have come over. And that might help Palace keep him. But you're right. It's a good spot, Neil, because he's special.
Yeah. So well done, Palace. Well done, Daniel Munoz.
And well done, Dougie Friedman.
Yeah, well done, Dougie Friedman. Couldn't agree more. Right, okay. We're going to have a comparisons. We're bringing that back today. But very quickly, in the spirit of this FA Cup theme, we're going to go back to They Used to Be Giants. And our choice today is the 1987 FA Cup winners, Coventry City. Let me just give you this remarkable...
I just want to say is that this Neil, for once, hasn't chosen it just because Frank Lampard is the manager. Before Frank got the job, this was on our to-do list. So.
Yeah, but Frank, you pulled it over the finishing line.
FA Cup.
Coventry have got the most remarkable history of any club ever. This is Coventry's history. Formed in 1919, between 1919 and 1967, they played in only Divisions 2, 3 and 4. From 1967 to 2001, they were in the top flight of English football. First of all, Division 1, and then, of course, the Premier League. That meant that in the turn of the century, the only clubs who had been in the top flight longer than them for an unbroken time at that time were Arsenal and Everton. They were the third longest serving club in the top flight. They got relegated in 2001 and they've never been back since then.
Wouldn't Liverpool come into that envelope?
No, Liverpool got promoted in 1962. 62. Oh, yeah.
62.
All right,
yeah.
three clubs. Yeah. 62, you're right.
We'll get a lot of complaints if we don't put that right.
Yeah, we're coming on to Liverpool in a minute, so Liverpool fans, don't switch off. Since 2001, they've been in all three divisions again. What's now the Championship, Leagues 1 and 2. So they're not so much a yo-yo club as a down in the dumps and up in the highs. They weren't a great club. They in that they only finished in the top half of the Division 1 Premier League a handful of occasions. Their highest finish was 6, which they did in 1968-69, I think, and 1988-89. They won the cup, of course.
Noel Cantwell was the manager.
Yeah,
when they
the
finished
first time.
sixth.
Yeah.
And because Jimmy Hill, again, older, I won't have to mention him to older listeners and viewers, but to younger, he was the
revolutionary,
absolute revolutionary, and it was the Sky Blues. He turned a successful team into an entertainment industry as well. He recognised the value of entertainment, and then went into television and became part of the entertainment industry as a pundit and a presenter and a host, and had a big influence on my development as well in the early 1970s. So,
and he was the guy who brokered the £100.
Yes,
minimum
he
wage.
Got rid of the
£20 minimum maximum wage and brought in £100 a week wage.
Much. But the amazing thing was
3 points for a win. He was the one who brought that in.
He got Coventry into the first division, which is now
from the third.
Without for the very first time in their history, and never managed a match in the top flight. No. He left.
Yeah, he did.
He basically got that crossroads in his life, and he took that path, which took him away from Coventry. We always loved Coventry.
I first saw Coventry in the third tier of English football in the mid-1960s when I was living in Richmond. I went to Queen's Park Rangers and saw Coventry beat them 6-3 the year they got promoted from the third tier, and Jimmy Hill was the manager, and they played long ball football like you've never seen in your life. They made Wimbledon look like a tick-a-tack team. But just to run through it, so best league position, 6 twice. FA Cup winners 1987, runners-up 2003 with Gordon Strachan as manager. League Cup semi-finalists 1981 and 1990. Won Intercities Fairs Cup, which was the pre-runner to the UEFA Cup, a year 1971-72. And another club that moved out.
Can I just add one to that list? FA Cup semi-finalists in 2024.
Oh, yes.
Which is...
robbed.
Well, there you go.
Robbed.
The Manchester United production team are gasping in horror that you
But they were robbed.
That,
yeah, they had the goal disallowed.
It was a truly wonderful goal, a game, and for the goal.
Yeah.
I say, I at the time, my first instinct was that it was just offside.
Robbed by power. But they are another club, Martin, who left their ground, the rather dilapidated Highfield Road, and moved to their new stadium.
Well, they sold the ground. That was the thing that they did, and they cashed in. It's their housing estate now, which is a great ground to commentate on. It's proper steep-sided ground where you were really, really in the thick of it, you know. And then they went to what was supposed to be the bright new future, and it turned out to be a massive disaster.
Yeah, and they've been, I think, is it 2 periods where they've been thrown out and had to rent grounds, and they've gone back again.
They played in Northampton,
I know,
you know, which is crazy. It's like Brighton played in Gillingham, didn't they? That's the kind of distances that you should never have to go to if you have to have a dodgy season where you need the facilities upgrading, you know?
Do you think they are a Premier League club in structure? Do you think they should be a Premier League club? Or do you think Coventry's a bit of a small city and maybe it was just ridiculous how long they...
you can't.
I mean, there's some really good managers.
The years that Burnley have been recently a Premier League club, you know, there's plenty of examples to say Coventry should be pushing. You ask their fans, they want that back. They had some magnificent teams
Had some really good players.
Yeah, really good players.
Talking of Dion Dublin, I can't stand Dion Dublin. He first game of the season, 97 and 98, 2 consecutive seasons. He tore Chelsea apart, playing centre forward for Coventry. He was outstanding.
Yeah, no, he's and you remember the Willie Carr flick up for the volleyed free kick. That was a Coventry. They'd had to change the law because of the cleverness of that. So it was a lovely place to.
Steven Grizovic, goalkeeper.
He scored a goal, didn't he? He scored a goal with a clearance. Yeah, and very, very pleased that they're in good hands with Frank now. But Mark Robbins is one of the
terrific job.
Listen, we've gone through our talk about Englishmen. I'm not going to revisit it. But if there is somebody who should be a Premier League manager who hasn't been, whoever the ownership is, it's Mark Robbins. And good luck to him at Stoke.
Yeah, and Coventry.
They just won at Sunderland, didn't they? So,
and Coventry,
in the FA Cup.
Coventry in the 4th round of the FA Cup.
Yeah, Coventry there as well. Yeah.
So,
Frank knows a bit about the FA Cup, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So.
I never did find anywhere good to eat in Coventry. Do you know what? I think the last time I was there, I gave up and came back to London.
Wow. Yeah. I can imagine if Frank is going to spend some time in Coventry, which is far enough away from London to suggest that he will do, and some temporary accommodation, he'll send you some advice. Frank, if you're watching this, send us a message as to where Neil can eat in Coventry. Yeah.
It's a good stadium.
You can pass through it going to Villa. So
it is a good stadium. The Ricoh Stadium.
At last, it is a good stadium. Yeah.
Okay, right. We're going to finally come to the last segment then. Thank you for listening on if you're a Liverpool fan. Comparisons. We've got 3 comparisons.
Oh, you've got 3. I'm going to try and shoot them down, but Neil is the instigator of all this, so he gets the credit, but occasionally gets a bit of flack from the guy in the other chair.
Darwin Núñez and Luis Suarez.
They are both Uruguayans.
Darwin Núñez doesn't score enough goals for the chances he gets, but plays some good football. Luis Suarez was an outstanding player who sometimes bit off more than he could chew.
Oh. Do I really have to follow that? When I first saw Luis Suarez play, he was a winger for Ajax, and it's more built like a winger than the penalty area fox in the box he became. Absolutely, what they both share is massive work ethic, completely driven the moment they cross the white line, and occasionally push back the frontiers. Maybe I thought Darwin was a bit lucky recently in the game against Manchester United to not escape more serious punishment for that jumping in challenge. But I suppose
is he not a problem, Darwin Núñez, for Liverpool, in that he is a very good player, except the finishing isn't as good as it could be?
Well, you've been telling me over the last 18 months how good Kai Havertz is, and listen. Some players just have that gift, and that they are going to score in the situation where you think most players would struggle. Darwin's just a normal player with a lot of other great qualities: work rate, physical presence, desire, everything that you want as a coach to play somebody up front who will chase the life out of the opposition. And he will score some goals, and some of them will probably be quite spectacular. Maybe sometimes he's one of those where a one-touch finish does the job if you have to think about it a bit too long. It's not something. I remember David Platt, who was a very good goal-scoring midfield player, telling me about what he used to make runs beyond, so he got in one-on-ones, and that to make them count, you had to move the ball. Then you move the goalkeeper. If you just follow the ball, a bit like Højlund does, if you just follow the ball and smash it at the goal, your percentages of scoring are lower. So if you move the ball, then the goalkeeper's got to start thinking, and where it maybe opens up a different kind of angle, a different kind of finish. And I don't think Darwin's got that kind of gift, whereas Diogo Jota has it, really
well,
has it.
Let's move on to this. Diogo Jota and Roberto Firmino.
I think it's funny because I don't know what the stats may disagree with this, but for me, Jota is the hungrier goal scorer. Firmino was quite happy to pass it across for Mane to score or Salah to score. But the joy that the other two found in his goals was a testimony to how much they recognised that he was absolutely a team player. Jota's a team player as well. But he has got that nose for a chance, and I would say his ratio of chances of finishing. There are all these stats now which could disprove.
I mean, the problem for both of them is fitness. They both missed too many games.
Yes,
and the one issue I've got with
Firmino didn't. Firmino missed games towards the end of his career, but he didn't miss so many when they were the red arrows, the three amigos, or whatever you call them. You know,
my one problem with Jota, whom I love, I think he's a wonderful player, is that he'll have a couple of fallow games starting, and then he's more impressive coming off the bench sometimes. He changes games distinctively when he comes.
That's the last thing he would want.
I know.
I don't know Darwin Núñez, and I didn't really know Bobby Firmino, but I know a bit about Jota, and he is somebody who's got a firm opinion on most things, and I mean a sensible opinion, not a sort of loudmouth or anything like that. But he knows the rights and wrongs of the game. I think he will have worked out his own game to a point that some players don't just go and play. But I think he knows what he can do and what he can't do. He's very good in the air for a relatively small player, but I just see him as a responsible character. In the dressing room and usually on the field. He's had one or two run-ins, hasn't he? But everybody has that. I mean, Firmino was lauded by everybody and by Jurgen Klopp particularly. It was almost sort of heartbreaking when they had to split it all up. Although Bobby he didn't have very good English really for someone who was here quite a long time. Maybe Suarez was a little bit the same. So I don't know how much that means they've integrated or not. Some people can learn languages, some people can't. Some people can pronounce foreign names, some people can't. I'm gesturing to my left here.
There was a gesture there for those who are listening only in my direction.
But they're all positives for Liverpool, and I think we talk about recruitment. We were talking about Dougie Freedman. I think the various recruiting officers for Liverpool have done a good job with all of them. I think a lot of people wish Núñez better luck. You know, if it is luck, or I just generally don't think you can put it into players that I think they either have it.
Before Gakpo came, he played quite a lot on the left.
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting point. He does like that, I think, and therefore he's coming on his right foot. He scored stacks of goals in Portugal, so maybe I'm doing a disservice. But maybe just being up there as the one, you've got to turn, you've got to be a bit more manoeuvrable. Are you going to get played in? VAR is going to rule you offside if you've mistimed the run. Whenever I'm commentating on Liverpool and he goes to the left, I don't go like you've talked about players being put out of position. Yeah. I think he can do it. He actually looks as though he's heading there voluntarily sometimes.
Yeah. Núñez or Jota?
Both. Together. What a partnership. Núñez would. Why do I have to have one or the other? I suppose.
Well, because if you're playing three up, you're going to have Salah and you're going to have Gakpo now or Luis Diaz. We're talking about a centre forward here in a front three.
Well, I'd probably have Núñez to soften them up and Jota to finish them off.
Yeah, I'd have Jota. But last season, Liverpool-Chelsea, I can't remember what the score was, but Núñez hit the post, the frame of the goal, 4 times in one game. Yeah. And they were thumping shots. They weren't mild ones.
No.
Jota. But Jota and Firmino aren't that dissimilar to me, and I think he's sort of carried that torch splendidly.
I mean, it was another player that Wolves have brought in, and cashed in on. And obviously there's talk that that's going to happen again at the end of this season. But they can be proud. I mean, they made a profit on a player that wasn't very well known.
No.
And certainly lived up to the expectations and fulfilled the last part of the bargain of signing for Wolves. Is you've got a sell on. You can go. People will pay more for you than we bought you for. So profit, good profit for Wolves. And I just feel it's a bit tough for the Wolves fans to know that that's happening for a club as famous, as historic as Wolverhampton Wanderers, that they are a bit of a feeding ground now for the clubs above them in the table.
There's only time left for stoppage time.
Stoppage time.
And this week's stoppage time is about responding to your communications with us. Martin first.
Yeah, I'd like to give a personal shout out to Mark Burke, who's made contact with me. Mark, Aston Villa fans will remember him. We met when Mark was 14, 15, playing for England schoolboys. I used to go, did those games quite regularly, and used to go to the training and have a chat with the lads. And Mark did very well in those games. Had a good career, long career around the globe, a travelling man. I think he's based maybe in the Netherlands now, where he certainly played some top class football. So great to hear from Mark. And also anybody out there, I've shouted goal with your name on it, remind me, and we'll have a chat through the podcast.
Yeah, brilliant. He was a good player. He's a good player. Yeah. Right, we've had a message from Taran, which says, wondering if in the next podcast you get Neil and Martin to react to a clip of Neil getting soaked by the Chelsea captain John Terry and Frank Lampard players whilst doing a broadcast for Chelsea TV. It's titled on YouTube, John Terry and Co. players get their revenge live on TV. It's a really funny video, and I'd love to see if Neil could tell us more about that, as well as what his celebration was like. It was actually the last weekend of the 2004-05 season, when Chelsea won the league for the first time in 50 years. The last game was at home to Charlton, which Martin commentated on, and gave me a lot of grief beforehand about how we were going to organise the presentation of the trophy on the pitch, and he told me how long he wanted me to wait between announcing each player and everything else.
Neil, you did it better than anybody else, because I had those conversations with a lot of people in your position, and sometimes the players just take over, and they're quite entitled to after what they
they took over. I did a live 90-minute, 2-hour programme on a Friday night, depending on which year it was, I don't remember, and called Big Match Countdown. And what happened was that leading into the game, the players were actually going to go out on a celebration on the Friday night before the Sunday game. And I was told by John Terry who to have on in order to keep them away from the celebration at the time.
Keep the bosses in the studio.
Yeah, which I duly did. What I didn't know was it was all a setup so the players could come and invade the studio. Even the quiet ones. Paulo Ferreira's in with this lot. So if we just play it.
Sometimes television, and I know we're on telly, thinks it by being there it doesn't change anything, and thinks that it has the right to be everywhere all the time. Quite often, if television goes into
well, what we're watching, you're seeing it on our visual podcast, but we're watching a group of players definitely dressed to go out later that night. I think, Neil, the word is battering.
Well, it was. I wasn't soaked. I was battered. There's Frank, Paolo. It was flour, eggs, and water. And what I will say is, if you haven't been able to see it, have another look, and you can see how I was literally covered from head to toe in batter.
Chelsea have won the lead.
And all I will say is that was obviously right at the end of the broadcast. And when the broadcast ended, the chief executive, Peter Kenyon, said, "Thank you very much," stood up and left.
Left you
and
in
I had no
disarray.
idea how I was going to get home.
No.
And in fact, sort of everyone else in the studio sort of searched around and helped me find some clothes in order for me to go home
Sometimes it gets
afterwards.
very hot in those studios. You could have ended up being fried.
But what I will say is,
but not very edible.
my suit and everything else was destroyed, but the players did give me a little donation. The club shop was closed. It was an evening television show.
I have to say, Neil, one other observation was that your two guests were looking extremely bored. And were obviously delighted that something had come on to liven up the evening.
Well, everybody knew about it, apart from Peter Kenyon and myself, I think. And Roman Abramovich, I know, was watching, anticipating it. They all knew it was going to happen. But it was... I don't think you get that now. I don't think you get that kind of joking around between football clubs and football media now, because it was much more informal and it was much less corporatized. I don't think it would be allowed
Mine,
now.
which I think is available on YouTube as well, was being pushed in Torremolinos into the swimming pool by the Wimbledon crazy gang. And I did slightly know. One of the kind player said to me a few minutes earlier, I was going to interview Dave Besson on the edge of the pool, so I can imagine they'd set that up. And but another player said, "Take your watch off." So I sort of half expected.
That's got to be Terry Gibson. There wasn't another sensible player
No,
there.
it was Francis Joseph, actually.
Oh,
very, very sensible. And my watch, and I've had this a long time. It might even be the watch that I'm wearing today. Survived it, and it was. But the rest was very spontaneous. And
Well,
I don't know how you felt, Neil, about it, but I think they only mess you about if they like you.
Oh, it was brilliant. We'd won the league. It was absolutely brilliant, and it was very funny. And one person who wasn't there missed it was Ida Gudjonsson, and I had him on a couple of weeks later, or maybe at the beginning of the following season, and he said, "I was so sad to have missed that." And he picked up a glass of water, like we had glasses of water on the table as you do, and he just picked up this full glass of water and threw it over me and said, "Right, carry on." So it was
a wonderful way to show affection.
But as I said, wouldn't happen now. Times change, and it's all corporatized now.
Well, there's also you have to be aware of how people would react, because that's clearly part of a wider issue. And if you're in on it, then it's never going to be quite the same. So I don't think people would take the risk that there would be an adverse reaction to it. But we had a good laugh, didn't we, with our two? That's for sure.
Yeah. Okay, from the Battered kitchen, from Martin and me.
See you next time.
That's right. Well, at least that doesn't happen in my kitchen. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the end and watching to the end. It probably has happened in my kitchen, if I think about it. And don't forget, you can go on the Patreon if you want to get more involved. Don't forget, you can read us on substack.com. And don't forget to like us, subscribe to us, and do everything else. And don't forget to listen in next week.